the card shuffle.
Card shuffling, yeah. So I will put cards to the side, and we will start. So, modern papist. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. I ran out of water. I got a full glass of water here before. I'm in Arizona, and so water is very out of it. But is other water, but it's on the other side of the room, and I'm incredibly lazy. And my wife isn't feeling well because she is now going on 9 months pregnant. No, don't get the water, hun. That wasn't a hint for you. Oh, she's going to get the water.
Yep,
Anyway.
I've been there. But you know what? I'm glad though, as someone from Michigan, that we sell you water. That your wife will now be able to go and get you water.
You don't sell me water, sir. I do not buy Michigander water.
Your government does, which you pay taxes to.
Well, that may be true for people who don't have 6 kids, but I have 6 kids, so I don't pay your filthy taxes. That's the thing. Like, I get it all the time. People are like, "You have so many kids, man." I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't pay taxes." And there's like my aunt. So I got my aunt is a she is a former councilwoman in Smithtown, New York. Very much hardcore Democrat, and so. But there's my grandmother's 90th birthday party, and she was there, and I was talking about how I have the 6 kids, and like, well, I'm gonna keep having them. She's like, so long, I don't care how many you have, so long as I don't have to pay for them. I'm like, but you do because I don't pay taxes. And then she laughed about it, but yeah, we we have fun. We have fun. But that kind of leads me into the thing. Okay, they're actually the thing I've been wanting to talk about. I just haven't had anyone really to talk about it, and I haven't thought about a good way to post about it. But I wanted to talk about men and insults generally. Because I've got some strong feelings about insults. I think that verbal sparring is very important, and I think that men innately do this type of verbal spar, just like where I started by calling you the modern papist instead of papist, because we didn't settle that online. What we settled was that I was right and 80 something percent of the population was wrong, which is fine. Look,
it wasn't exactly a scientific study either.
No, look, all I'm saying is that I believe they're saying is that not just because it's popular doesn't make it right, and just because it's right doesn't make it popular. So in that vein, I'm pretty sure that means I'm right because I'm not popular. So I've got to be very right because I'm super not popular. But no, I think men insult each other a lot. And like that's kind of what we do. That's kind of our language, right? It's like if you trust someone, you will insult that person. And it to the point where it's actually good for you to be insulted by your fellow man.
Yep.
Because your best friend should be able to point out your worst flaws to you well before your worst enemy gets wind of them, right? Like,
yes.
And our modern culture is taking it into this idea that you should be nice to your friends, right? You should be nice to them. You shouldn't be insulting. It's like you should be insulting. You should insult your friends, and to not insult your friends is to do them a disservice. And there's a level of respect there's a level of respect you have to have before you insult someone. And I think that part kind of gets missed at sometimes. Some people just jump straight into the insults, like when they first meet someone, and it makes everyone uncomfortable. But you have to gain a level of trust before you can insult someone. And then the closeness of that person is the amount that, like, the level of insult that you can levy at them is dependent upon the closeness of a relationship. Like I couldn't just go out there and insult Matt Walsh because he doesn't know who I am, right?
Yeah.
Like he's a big famous guy. People insult him all the time, so it wouldn't really bother him. But it wouldn't be the same thing as like if you insulted me, right? And I'm not saying we're best friends or anything. We don't have our best friend rings yet, although I believe mine's in the mail. But if you insulted me, it would be fine, and it would be like a show of like how well we would know each other. And we don't know each other that well, but we have been chatting for a bit. So I'd like to think that I'm getting to know you, even though I don't actually know your name. I know you as Mr. Modern Papist, and you're going to tell me I mispronounce it, and I'm going to tell you I don't, and we go back and forth on that, and that's good. It's good, and like, but like, I had an experience on the Catholic Twitters where there was a guy who is very much like a bravado type guy, and he just insults everyone, and that it made me. It's just something that's been on my mind since that time, where it's like when you are in this kind of like when you don't have that level of comfort with someone and you insult them, it actually will hurt that person.
Yeah.
But once you get to that level of comfort, you can insult, like, your best friend. You should be able to say the worst things about them to them, and they know that it comes from a good place. But if you're a stranger, you can't do that. And like navigating that, I think, is harder in this like internet realm because we don't understand the level of closeness that we have with someone, and we might think that we're closer to them than we are because we don't have that same level of interaction as you would if were a bunch of guys that went to the same bar every week or something like that.
No, I mean, you make that's a very good point because, like, so I've been hanging out with a group of Exodus guys. I call them Exodus guys because we met in Exodus 90.
Yeah, I know the type.
Yeah, and so, like, we, at the beginning of 2020, so just before everything got locked down, when we meet, because we still meet, like, on a regular basis,
Mm-hmm.
and not everybody can make it, but that's exactly the type of, like, fraternal, it's like a fraternal bond that you have where it's just this, you insult each other to help each other, and then you also, you don't overdo it, but, like, you can't just pretend everything's, like, hunky-dory if it's not. And so, it even got to a point where with one of our friends, there was kind of like this issue where a guy wasn't responding like he trusted us, and it was like really weird. But it deals exactly with like the insults. It's like you think you're helping a person, you think he knows what you're talking about and where you're coming from, but he's taking it as an attack. And it's being able to, from my end, I'm not going to speak for the group, but from my end, it comes from, all right, well, you need to know where this person's at in their life. But at the same time, like, if they're going to be obstinate in that, like, you also have to learn when to walk away, which is, I think, really hard for some people, especially if they're close to them. I kind of just rushed through the gambit of different,
I mean, it's
of different
like
levels.
These are the things about men and manliness that we don't talk about.
Right.
Like, nobody talks about the value of insults between men. I mean, we get it. Like, most men on some level get it. Right? They understand it because they've just grown up with it. But we're like, we have a generation of kids that hasn't grown up with it, that hasn't grown up with being teased by their older brothers, right? Or their younger brothers or their father or something like that, where they've had a lack. Like, we have smaller families now, so you're not going to have the older brother, younger brother dynamic if you have just one kid, or if you just have two kids and one is a boy and one is a girl. You don't have that kind of older brother mentality. And then if your father's not in the picture, you're not going to get any of that type of, the things that you were taught by your father without him saying a word, right? He's not like, your father's not going to come to you and say, by the way, son, when you have a close-knit group of male friends, you guys are going to make fun of each other, and you're going to do it in a way that your female friends are not going to understand or appreciate. It's just a thing that men do. Like, that doesn't happen, right? If you don't have, like, even if you have a father, he doesn't say it, but you see it because you see how he interacts with his male friends, and you see how he interacts with his brother, and you see that kind of thing that happens between them, and you kind of get, okay, this is how men act towards each other. And then when, like, the father acting up with the daughters, you'll see, okay, that the father doesn't insult the daughters in the same way that he would insult his son, right? And the kind of like to train him to be a good man, right? And so then the boys realize, okay, this is not how I treat women because my father treats me differently than he treats my sisters. So now I understand that there's a distinction with how men act with men and how men act with women. And like there's like the whole thing that we're just missing out on. All of the like there's so many people out there trying to do this like manly man thing. You know what I mean? Like there's
Oh, the manly man. I thought you were going to go the route of like general parenting where it fits everybody. Because that's also a problem.
Yeah, that is also a problem. But no, there's like this like when you got these like these internet gurus talking about what it means to be a man, right? And they don't like you can kind of see how they interact with each other, and sometimes you see that kind of sibling rivalry type stuff, but they don't show you they don't like tell you about how you're supposed to make fun of your fellow man. They just talk about the terrible things that you should do and why you should be a terrible person because it helps you with the ladies, which doesn't actually help you with the ladies. It helps you with bad things. So, but yeah, I mean, then there's also like the parenting, like you're trying to parent everyone in the same exact way and you can't. And even between, like, I'm not even between, like, no two children are alike, and you don't treat both of your children the exact, like, if you have, you know, 3 girls, you don't treat each one or them all exactly the same. You treat them each separately, and that's part of parenting a large family really helps you understand the different personalities that people have. And like you have people like, oh yeah, I have a girl, now I'm gonna have a boy. Our boy is different. Like each boy is different, but they're gonna have similarities too, right? So how many kids do you have, modern papist, if that's not a rude question to ask?
Oh, no, it's not. I've got 4. And so I have 2 girls, two boys. I had 2 girls first and then 2 boys. Oldest is about to turn 10. Youngest is turning 2 tomorrow. So
good news.
So that's that is good news. And it's you're right. Like I have a real problem when people are like, you know, I have a boy and a girl. One is very different from the other, and it's like, well, no crap. Like you have a sample of one for both. Like because you know, I usually think of these in terms of like statistics and sampling, because like you're only looking at 2 people, and 2 people are always going to be different. Right. Like you're always going to find differences, and now
the monkey paradox.
I've never heard of that, but I'm sure you can explain it.
Okay. I give you a monkey, okay? It could be anything. A monkey, a dog, whatever. One of some kind of...
I like dogs. Let's go with dogs.
Okay, I give you a dog, right? This dog has its own, like, independent personality, right? That you can recognize, and you get to know this one dog. Okay?
Animality.
Animality, whatever. I give you 2 dogs, okay? Each one has their own distinct personality. They're going to have some similarities, but overall, you're going to see them as distinct entities. I give you 100 dogs. Well, now all you really see are the similarities between them, and you're not so focused on the differences between them.
Yep.
Because there's so many. Like your mind can't compartmentalize each individual dog into 100 different parts. So now all of a sudden it's just a group called dogs.
Yep.
And you look at the similarities between them. And so when you're thinking about like men versus women, if you take any individual man and like one man and one woman, you can see similarities and differences between them. But then when you have 1 million men and 1 million women, then you're like, okay, we're going to separate them out into categories: woman, man, and look at the similarities between women and look at the similarities between the men and say, okay, this is my understanding of them as a whole. And even though when you get down to an individualized level, you do know that there's differences between them and not everyone fits into the exact mold. But just like with dogs, you're just going to be like, okay, these are just dogs, right? And you're like, okay, these are big dogs and small dogs. Good. Now I can know the differences between big dogs and small dogs. But you're not going to be able to individualize them. It's the monkey paradox. But instead of monkeys, we're using dogs here. But that's the idea. Like you have monkeys, you have a monkey, you have 100 monkeys. You're not going to think of the individual monkey personality or animality with it.
Yes, exactly. No, and you're right. Like that's kind of the point that I was trying to like flesh out, and you did that really well. Because like it's just really it just bothers me when people have one experience or they have two experiences, but they're vastly different with a very noticeable like underlying like premise that they're not acknowledging. It always creates a problem for me because you're putting that out to the world and you're expecting, like, it's almost like you're expecting people to shower you with praise for noticing it. Or
one of my favorite things is when like people are like, well, my boy is different from my girl, and here are the differences between them. Like, yeah, okay. I have I have 4 girls and 3 boys. Okay. I think I have a little bit more experience in telling the differences between them. But go ahead, tell it. Like, it's just one of the things that I like because I have the 6 kids, right, and one on the way. So I've got 3 boys now and 4 girls, and the youngest is the easiest to take care of. He sits in my wife's womb all day long. I don't have to do much except for feed her and let her rest. So it's pretty. That deal is pretty good, but it's the time on that one's almost up, and anyway, but yeah, so like I this the it's always interesting to see people who have like 2 kids giving parenting advice, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it was really difficult when we had our second." Like, was it? You want to talk about difficulty there, Miss?
so like for you, because for us, like after like the first one was like our oldest was the hardest, and everyone else was easier because we knew what to expect for the second, and we knew how to like basically care for the first, and then when we had our third, even though it was a boy and it wasn't a girl, and we'd been used to 2 girls at that point, it was marginally like I don't even it wasn't harder. It felt easier when we had our third than when we had our second.
How old was your first when you had your third?
4, almost.
Okay, that makes the difference. The younger your first is, the harder your third will be. If that makes sense. So
My wife just pointed out the chaos coefficient. Do you know about that? I don't know about that. She just threw that at me. I have no idea what that means, but it's in reference to what you're saying, though.
Internet tells me the chaos coefficient. Well, it's part of I don't know. It's polynomial chaos. Whatever. The point is, when you have, so we had 1 initially. Then my wife had twins. She chose to have twins because they were fraternal, which means that she released 2 eggs. It wasn't my fault. I didn't split the egg into 2. She released 2 eggs, so that's on her. But we went from 1 to 3. And 3 is the hardest number of kids that you can have, especially when they're all young. We had 3 under 3. So that
is really tough.
That was probably the hardest year of my entire life. Everything else pales in comparison. Everything else is baby 4, super simple. Baby 5, super simple. Baby 6, even simpler. Right now, baby 7, this should be a cakewalk. But when your oldest is 4, your oldest can pretty much take care of herself when you're looking at baby number 3, right?
Yep.
So now that we have an 8-year-old, twin 6-year-olds, a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1.5-year-old. So they operate kind of as a unit together, where they can, like my oldest can make lunches for the younger ones, and so when my wife is tired, she doesn't have to work as hard. So it just becomes easier down the line the more kids that you have. But 3 is generally the hardest if you have them in close succession. If they're separated out, then 3 is not so bad, because the thing about 3 is that you're no longer playing man to man. It's zone defense.
That is exactly how I would describe it.
That's how it was described to me when we went from 1 to 3. They're like, "Oh yeah, 3's hard because you're no longer man to man. It's zone defense." I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm not really good with sport metaphors, but that one made sense. And so yeah, that's kind of like how the whole thing is. Like when they're young and you have a bunch of young ones, like you can't leave a 2-year-old by herself so that you can work on the twin babies. It's like you have to juggle them all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's something. So infertility is a big issue that people talk about, but not a lot of people talk about the issue of hyperfertility, which is what we deal with, which is can get difficult, but it's also a blessing, right? It's just like infertility, like people who like struggle with fertility, like they have one kid and then it'll be like 2 years before the next kid and like 2 years before the next kid because they have infertility in between
Yeah.
for whatever reason. Like that's difficult to deal with, and I can't imagine how difficult that must be to be like, okay, we're trying to have another baby, this is supposed to be super simple, part A into slot B, this is supposed to be like, it's just supposed to work, and that's and there's a lot of sympathy out there for people who have issues with fertility, but not with hyperfertility, which is where like if you sneeze on your wife the wrong way, then she gets pregnant, and like it becomes a difficult situation because of the you are almost always expecting a baby, which is also a lot of fun and lots of joy there, but there's also a lot of difficulty there as well, and people always give you the stink eye when they see that you're walking into the store with a gaggle of kids and like, oh well, don't you know how that works? Like, yes, I'm just very good at it. And I'm just kind of rambling about it, but yeah, it's like hyperfertility is something that nobody really like
Well,
talks about.
well, right, because like most people would be like, all right, well, just go on contraception, and it's like, well,
Right.
we can't do that. Like, that's not
Right.
something we're. It's not that we're allowed to do; it's that it's wrong to do because there's nothing broken there.
Right. It's not a bad thing. It just is. It's a thing that occurs, and it's difficult, and it's like there's different people who have different difficulties in life, and you have to like the thing that people have the hardest time with that I can see is understanding the difficulties others go through when they themselves would like to go through those difficulties, if that makes sense.
Right, because like, okay, so like that would be similar to because there's the case to be made that when people look at you, like look at our family of four in the grocery store, they don't sympathize with, all right, well, like my kids are running around. They kind of either they have a number of potential emotions. They could be jealous because they're not able to have as many kids as you, or they feel in some way like not able to, like in not medically, but because of their financial status. But like then there's the idea that the world is overpopulated and you're just making things worse, or like there's a whole bunch of them.
Okay, I'm gonna pause you there because I want to like the people who say the world is overpopulated don't really believe it.
Oh yeah, because they would off themselves if they really believed what they would off themselves. Right. And I know that's harsh to say, but I mean, you got to lead by example in those situations.
Right. Usually, what they're saying is like if there's too many people, it's somebody else has to fix themselves to solve this problem. If you really thought that so many people on the planet was going to destroy the planet, then they're like, if the people in government actually thought it, if anyone actually thought it, then there would be like China's one child policy type deal. Like that's the thing that you do if you actually think that the world is overpopulated, but you don't. You just want to say that to feel more comfortable with your choice that your comfort level in life is more important than the life of another person. Anyway, continue on. Sorry.
Well, it's just because like it's the first one that I guess like you're kind of suggesting is that I'm not going to be sympathetic towards you because I can't have what you have, and because I can't have what you have, I'm going to resent you. And I'm not saying everybody has that feeling. Not at all. But there are some people who definitely give you the stink eye that do. And I've never had this happen. I usually get praise when I bring in kids because the bar for The bar for fathers is just so low.
You could trip over it.
Yeah, it's like I think you've mentioned that once, but like the idea that like I go in with my 4 kids and I'm like, hey, super dad, and it's just kind of like I'm just going to the grocery store like with my 4 kids, and like my wife has gotten crap for it. And it's just the dynamic is so different because even from grandmas, like there's just no sympathy.
My grandmother had 7 kids, and she was, I think, one of 9, and then her mother was one of like 12 or something like that. But my grandmother's, all of her kids had 3 or 4, between like 2 and 4 kids each, really. Like one had 2, one had 3. My mother obviously my mother had 4. I say obviously, like, me, but I have an older brother and 2 older sisters, so my mother had 4. And so like there's that, like they each had a couple of kids each, not a lot, um and so like I like my grandmother now has a closer connection to me because we have similar stories, right? Like she had 7 kids. We're expecting our 7th. I mean, and technically we lost 3, so we're at 10 children overall, but we only take care of 7 of them.
Right.
God takes care of the rest, however he does. But like now you have that connection. That's a connection that we can bridge back to older generations. Like your grandmother and great grandmother, if they're still alive, are going to have a lot more to talk to you about if you have a bunch of kids than your parents who may have had 2 kids. Right?
That's actually almost exactly the case. Like my mom had 2 boys, me and my brother, and then my grandmother had 5 kids. And so we have a lot more relatability to my grandmother on this point than to my mom. Yeah, so like I'd like to talk to my grandparents or my grandmother about this because I think she has a lot of wisdom in to bestow to me. It's just the family dynamic and where we live and how we are able to meet makes it hard to do that. But that is exactly the case that we have, because like talking to my mom about having 4 kids like is really weird because she just has no experience with it.
If you try to talk to anyone, and this is where it gets complicated, because like if you talk to someone who doesn't have a lot of kids and you talk about anything that seems like it's difficult to have a lot of kids, the immediate kickback is, well, you chose to have them. Like, yes, I did, and you know what? The joy outweighs the difficulties, but there still are difficulties. I'm happy I have all my kids, but there are still like it's still like, if you are, let's say that you became a movie star or something like that. It's like you're making millions of dollars, and then it's like, oh man, the paparazzi are the worst. And it's like, yeah, well, you chose to be a movie star. I'm like, yeah, and I chose this life because of the benefits of it, but that doesn't mean that there aren't negatives associated with it as well. Like there's a positive and a negative aspect of all decisions that you made. So like there's gonna be some times where it's difficult, like when trying to buy a car. When you have 7 kids, what kind of car can you get? Well, nothing but the biggest, the trad wagons.
No, you make a really good point because like we wouldn't apply that to most jobs. Like a construction worker losing his knees. Like my grandfather, my late grandfather, was a construction worker, and basically his knees were shot when I came to know him. Just growing up, and because he'd worked construction for so long. But like, if you ever told him, well, that's what you get for doing construction, it's like, well, he had 5 kids to feed, and that was like the best paying job that he could have at the time, and it really was. It was really good paying for what he was doing, and that's just what it is. And I think it's really weird to have these, like, it's not quite a double standard, but it is definitely an awkward standard to hold against family sizes. Because I mean, you can't do that in a job because that's illegal. That is actually breaking a federal law. But but people outside of that, have no problem showing their disgust. And I do think part of it is because of our previous generation of everybody, not just Catholics, but non-Catholics too, where they did just stick to two, because not because of global warming or anything like that, but because of like, all right, well, we want to go on vacations and we want to go on a lot of them, or we want to go on, we want to have the best car, the best house. We want to keep up with all the Joneses, not just that family that's named Joneses. And it's like this understanding of like this it's almost like a collective, I don't know, a collective mindset to go to extreme waste or extreme satisfaction, but with very little payoff. Because like now they're reaping it, right? Like they don't have that many kids, and if they had, I mean, heaven forbid you have 2 kids and you screwed up a relationship with both of them. When you die, I mean, or getting close to death, like you're gonna have a hard time.
Well, I got a couple points here. One is the thing that I tell everyone, like when they're like, "Oh, you got a bunch of kids," like, yeah, you know what? I'm playing the odds here, and one of them's going to be successful. So long as one of them's successful, I'm set. I don't have to worry about the rest of my life. All I got to do is get them to the point where they're successful, right? And then even if the rest of them are just moderately successful, combined together, their income will be able to float me well past retirement, when I'm into my old age, and I'll be able to use that. Like, I had so many kids, I could have gone on vacations. I can use that as my guilt to get whatever I need, But
well, that would actually be in line with subsidiarity and natural law and tradition.
Well, yeah, but the reality is, like, the thing that is most devastating is when you see like someone who had one kid, right? They had their one kid. Everything was, they chose one kid and like, okay, one and done, right? And then that kid, for whatever reason, doesn't make it. Something happens, car accident, suicide. In a lot of cases, there's a rise in that type of stuff, or something bad happens to that kid, right? And it happens at the point where like the woman is beyond the menopause. Right. So now that child is gone. You put all your eggs into that one basket.
Literally.
Yeah, like you decided that this one child was going to carry on your family name forever, and something bad happens, and something bad can happen, right? And I'm not saying that like if you have 6 kids and one of them dies, it's not a bad thing. It is still a bad thing, right? It's still a devastating thing.
Yes.
But you still have family. You still have a family there and people that you can grieve with. If you have one kid and you lose that one kid, right? It's you made the sacrifice of all the potential other children to try to make the best life for that child who didn't make it. And like if you're talking like a logistics standpoint, right? It doesn't make sense to have one kid because you can't guarantee the outcome, right? You can't guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen to that one kid. Like that you can't guarantee that. So you should have like purely from from logistics standpoint, you should have multiple children because you're going to increase the probability that they will be successful by like if success is a 1 in 10,000 shot, if you have 8 kids, now you've got 8 in 10,000 as opposed to 1 in 10,000, right? And so you have, and those other children, by the virtue of them being in a large family, learn to navigate a world where they're not getting along with everyone, but still finding a way to function, where they work together with their siblings, even though there's going to be tensions there, and that'll help them in the real world to be able to get a job with people that they don't like but they still have to work with, and all that. Like,
no, that is actually a huge part that is completely missing with the two or one family structure. Right. There's the fact that one, kids are afraid of babies because they never experienced babies growing up because you had the 2 kids really close and you were 2 and done, and there was no babies in the house after that. And so they don't have experience with it, and so they don't want kids in the future because they just look at them as some burden. And then you have this play between siblings where you grow, like you love your brother even though you just really hate his personality. You know what I mean? Like, and you appreciate that. Like, you appreciate the fact that he's your brother and that you love him and that you grew up with him and you guys have a lot of shared experiences, but the way he acts you don't like.
Well, that prepares us. Like, there's a reason why Christ called us to be brothers and sisters, right? Because that dynamic there is what we really need to emulate. The I don't like you, but I will love you.
Yes.
Right? I don't like you, but we're still gonna work together for the future of mankind, right? We're working together for the future of the church, the future of mankind, right? Um, so that's kind of like the thing that we kind of lose when we're talking about smaller families. And not that if you have a small family, it's not bad. If you end up with a small family because of reasons beyond your control, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying that you're going to have to find some way to make sure that you put them into a situation where they're going to see children a lot and they understand the joys of children and stuff like that. And if yeah, if you're like, okay, we have these two kids, so we're going to spoil them to death, it's not going to be helpful. Like, it doesn't matter how many times you go to Disney World with your kids. Like, if you go every year, they're going to just start finding it as a boring family vacation. But
Yes.
like, if you live together and actually grow together as a family, there's something there, something there.
Yeah, because like my mom, you know, even though we only had, you know, she only had two kids. This is one of the things that she learned with her family of, you know, she's one of five, is that you need to really care about your siblings because they're going to be your friend for the rest of your life. Like, they're gonna be there for you for the rest of your life. And if you have a bad relationship, um, it's going to be bad. I mean, you're going to. I mean, for us, for me and my brother, like, that was, you know, our only relationship, so it was important. But it's just this idea of growing up with these people. These people are going to know you since you were born. Like, some of them are going to know you since you were born, and have seen your life in almost complete totality. You know, you have to appreciate who they are and the fact that God gave you these people to know in such a way. Which I think is another thing that a lot of people kind of miss. It's like, God put you in a family, like in a particular family. It wasn't like a random distribution. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, you as, you know, Ryan, my name, you know, we're put in you know, your family, and that's part of your purpose. And a lot of today's understanding is no, a lot of today's understanding is you know, well, your family isn't your identity. It's like, no, that's BS. Like, that is actually a huge part of your identity, and that's a great way to promote disunity in the family. You know, even for those families that don't have a full family, like they're missing a father or a mother, like, you need to appreciate your family and love them, because at the end of the day, like, they care more about you than literally anybody else. And so the idea that that messaging just is, to me, very evil. Now, that doesn't mean, like, if your dad's a carpenter, you're going to be a carpenter. Like, that's true. That is absolutely true. Right, exactly.
So I'm gonna get real with you here for a minute. I haven't heard you talk about your father. I've heard you mention that what your mother does and who your mother is.
Yeah.
But what's your relationship with your father, modern Pappas?
Not super, but like, not bad.
See, I my relationship with my father is very bad. So I was hoping to commiserate over that, to talk about bad dads.
I wouldn't say, like, you know, he's not like a drunk or anything. I mean, you know, being very fair, but it's like, I'm, you know,
so
there have been things that, when it comes to, especially with regards to the faith, like, there's been pushback recently, and so, like, there's, there's kind of that, but generally speaking, I wouldn't say like he hasn't tried, because like my parents got divorced, and so
Mine too.
yeah.
So I think we talk about how we talked about it earlier. The bar is set so low for dads that you could trip over it, right?
Yeah.
And yet there's still some people who manage to squeeze underneath it. That like um right, but like and you really have to work hard to not to not be praised by society as a father. Like you're talking like, well, he wasn't a drunkard or anything. He just abandoned me, right? Like that's
Well, I wouldn't say that either. He didn't abandon me, but it was like there was a divorce that happened, and
right. But like that's a bad thing,
it
right?
is. Yeah.
That is like you're talking like, oh, my parents got divorced, but it's okay. It's not okay because one or both of them screwed up and decided to leave, and that's a bad thing, and that like automatically causes so much trauma within the household and within your life and your brother's life and everything that maybe like we're supposed to tell ourselves, and this is society was talking, is like your father got a divorce from your mother, but they're both good people and they both love you very much. Like
Mrs.
that's
Doubtfire.
right, like, but that's not necessarily true. In Mrs. Doubtfire, the mom is the bad guy because he wants to be, because he wants to be a good dad, and he wants to have his marriage work. He had difficulties, and they probably should have worked them out, But like every step along the way, she makes things super difficult for him to try to be a dad. So clearly, she's the bad guy. The mom in Mrs. Doubtfire is the bad guy.
Yeah.
She's the one that demands a divorce, and like there's nothing that he could do at that point, and he just wants to have his family together again, even if it's together because he's dressed as a nanny and he's just there helping them and being a good person. Um, and but yeah, you're supposed to like that idea is like there's your father and your mother decided to get a divorce, and it's not neither of them are bad for it. Like somebody was bad for it, and in my case, my father, he would do the same things like you just said about your father. He'd be like, "Well, I wasn't a drunk, I gave your mother the house when I left." It's like, yeah, that's true, but those are just things, and not not like not understanding that the thing that the family wants most of all is for the family to be together. And even if there's badness there, right? They still want the family to be together. Now, of course, I'm not talking about things like abuse or anything like that, but with abuse, like the person who leaves isn't the bad guy with abuse. The person who is abusing is the bad guy.
Right.
Right? Like that's like there clearly is somebody who's doing something wrong. But if you're being abused, then don't stay in that marriage. Find a way for safety and things like that.
Yes.
But like for that, and whenever you talk about divorce is bad, what you get is like people talking about the 0.1% of divorces that are because of abuse, and like not the 99% of divorces that are because of the one parent or both parent just says, I'm done, right? Like, I want to live my life, and all of a sudden, okay.
No, yeah. Those are terrible. Those are like the worst.
Which is what happened was that my mom got sick and was sick for a long time, like over a decade.
Wow.
She was sick, and it's a sad thing that happened. She got sick, and she was constantly sick, and my father is just like, you know what, I'm done, and he walked out. And then he's like, and then he couldn't understand why everyone was mad at him. Well, this isn't supposed to be a therapy session, but here we go anyway. But he couldn't understand why everyone was mad at him about it because he was just trying to find his happiness. He wasn't happy, and he was trying to be happy. And everyone, now that he is happy, everyone should be happy for him. And nobody is. Nobody likes him. Everyone's mad at him, and he just can't get it. And that's because that whole
He fell
it's
for
like
the lie.
Well, it's like the bar is set so low. So that's what so there's so many men that see the bar's low. If you take your kids to the grocery store and you don't scream at them, you are a fantastic dad, right? That's the bar. You if so long as you spend time with your kids, you're a great dad. And we need to raise it, obviously. But then at the same time, there's so many men who just can't manage to cross that bar when it's so low that you could trip over it. Right? It's like the idea is you have to die to yourself. You have to do what is best for your family. You have to sacrifice. Sometimes you're going to be unhappy in your marriage and with your family, but happiness is not the same thing as joy, and the conflation of the two of them has is one of the greatest sins of the modern time. That's just like the conflation of love and romance is one of the greatest sins of modern time. It's like we get so we get these broken families because the romance has died and they forget that love is important, and they let the romance die because they're so focused on something that's not as important as keeping the marriage together. And like the worst is like when a parent spends so much time doting on their child that their marriage falls apart. It's like
Yeah.
you need to that marriage is so much more important than the doting on the child. Keeping that marriage together.
Yeah, that brings up a different point. Like when you have these conversations, online or anywhere, people are like, well, when it comes to priorities, shouldn't the kid be priority over the spouse? And it's like, no, not at all. And they're like, well, why aren't you guys willing to die or sacrifice or whatever? And it's like, no, that's the thing. We are.
Right.
We are, but we need to make sure that we're good with each other before that happens. Like if there's a situation where, the two are drowning, I know my wife would want me to choose the kid over her.
Right.
And that is a loving act, but that is an extreme act. Right. If the kid is abusing, my daughter, for example, one of my daughters will go, well, mom said this, and I'll check with mom, and like, no, I didn't say that. Okay, well, you're lying. Stop playing me. Like, stop trying to play me. And people don't realize the dynamic with, well, I have no problem talking to my wife like that, just checking in with her to make sure that the one kid is telling the truth, as opposed to just taking the kid's word and then being resentful towards the other parent because I didn't do a very obvious communication thing with my wife. And it's that dynamic where it's not just the dawdling of the kid of giving them so much attention, but also just trusting them just because they're the kids. And there's some people who are like, well, why would my kid lie to me? And it's like, well, there's like a billion reasons why your kid would lie to you.
Oh, like the kids lie all the time. They test boundaries. They lie because they want to see. Sometimes it's because they don't remember it correctly, and sometimes it's because they're deliberately trying to lie to you so they can get their way. Because kids test the boundaries. They see what they can get away with, and that's why you have to be firm early on so that they know, okay, I'm not going to get away with this. I shouldn't try it. And then they'll be honest.
And then there's also the other side of that, where they have an expectation of what you expect, and they don't meet it at that point, and so they lie because they want to make you happy. And that happens too, and so you have to be, it's not so much you have to be firm at that point, but you have to really show like love at that point when you start realizing that that's happening. Yeah, it is very complicated. So like when you have some people, and I'm going to be very vague here, when it comes to the T of the alphabet group, saying that well, like if they're willing to tell a teacher over the parent, it means they're afraid of the parent. It's like, no, like it's not the afraid that you think it is. It's not like a tyrant. It's they have an expectation with their parents. They don't think that expectation meets what their parents want, and they're telling someone else who, frankly, doesn't care about them. And I mean, they give the appearance that they do, or I mean, they might actually genuinely care, but the connection between the two is so minimal, as opposed to the parents who have every right to know about this feeling, and but at the same time, it's used as like, oh well, they're scared, and so the school's not going to tell them, type of thing. And you're just like, no, that is like backwards. Like, the parents care about that kid more than that teacher does. Like anybody who argues against that is just full of it.
And then you have the teachers who think that they're the parents of the child that they're teaching, and it's like, step back, because that's not your job. Your job is to convey knowledge, not to be a parent. Like, no, we're so much more than just someone who conveys. Like, no, you're paid and you're trained in how to impart knowledge onto children, 28 to 50 at a time, depending upon class sizes, and not to zone in on a particular child and to become that child's parent or surrogate parent, because they have parents at home.
Yeah.
Like, that's my job, is to be a parent, and your job is to teach my child, which is what I would say if we didn't homeschool. But since we homeschool, my job is both. but um but yeah, I mean, it's one of those where, oh, it's one of those. That's one of those. But yeah, I mean, there's just it's complicated and it's difficult, and being a parent isn't easy. But it doesn't mean it's bad, and it doesn't mean that you should avoid it. It means that it's not easy. Just like it's not easy to exercise and lose weight when you need to. That doesn't mean don't do it. It means you're gonna have to work at it. I remember. Oh, this is something that just popped into my head years ago. There's somebody who was saying, like, I had, like, they were upset because people were like, oh, in order for me to do X, I had to suffer for it, so that means you should too. And like, shouldn't we try to remove the suffering? Like, no, because sometimes the suffering is what makes the thing you're getting worth it, right? It's like it like when you have a kid, if you're, let's say your mother-in-law came over and just took the kid away the whole time, anytime that you struggled in the least bit, your mother or your mother-in-law would just come by and just be like, I'm going to take the kid and you relax. Like, that's not helpful for you as a parent. That's not helping you. That may be like, there may be once a month or a week or something like that, to make sure that you get some rest, but to constantly be taking away your ability to struggle with grace does not help you. It hurts you in the long run, because you don't know how to deal with it, and then other things are going to occur later on, and you haven't figured out how to deal with the stressors of parenthood. And like, or with anything, right? Like, if you want to be a grand chess master, and anytime you're about to lose a game, somebody forfeits the game for you, forfeits the game so that they don't upset you, right? Or you don't have to struggle with it to get better at it, then you're not going to really be great, because you learn by your struggles and not by your victories. Your victories don't teach you much at all. The better you do at something, like if you do something and you're wildly successful at it initially, then then I mean, you don't know how to deal with the not that, right? You don't know how to deal with failure.
Right.
So like, and I'm going to get a little bit controversial here, but one of the biggest problems with, like, you see these things like the teachers who have relationships with students, like, female teachers with male students, right? Like, the female teacher preys on the male student. The male student doesn't realize he's being preyed upon. He thinks that he's scoring or whatever, right?
Yep.
So you have, like, or like, just a predatory female who just does sexual advances on a male, right? And then after that, after the aftermath of all that, she goes to jail, whatever, blah blah blah. But for the child, the boy, he doesn't understand how relationships work now, because his first experience was woman come to you, gives you whatever you want, and then that's how relationships work. So now the rest of his life, he's going to be expecting that to happen again. but in a position that's better for him, or that she won't go to jail. But that's not going to happen again. That's one of it's a big thing we should consider. And when you're talking about like if something like that happens to a boy, everyone's like, oh yeah, pat him on the back, good job, buddy. You got that teacher was smoking hot and she went for you. It's like, no, he is ruined. Unless somebody helps him, he is ruined from that experience because he's just going to be like, oh, like that's the same problem with like pornography is that what do they, if you're watching it, what happens? It's not a caring consensual type of deal. It's I dropped this bag of beans. So what's going to happen? Or I don't have money to pay for the pizza. That type of stereotypical thing. And so
It took me a second to realize what you were saying, but like, yes, that.
But yeah, and like men will, and so these boys will see this when they're young and impressionable, and then they will expect something like that to occur in their lives, and it won't because it's not real. And like those are the things like beyond the moral issues with it in general. There's a reason why God doesn't want us to have to indulge in those types of things. It's because for obviously the moral implications, but when you're talking about morality and immorality, the effects of that is that it ruins the people who have to deal with it, right?
Right, because like it becomes an addiction. You try to get that high that you got initially, like with the student, for example.
Right.
Like he's just never going to hit that again. Like that's just not happening.
And beyond that, nobody's going to show that kid sympathy. Like he tries to go to like a support group, be like, yeah, I had this teacher who, when I was 13 and she was 23, she came on to me, and I don't know how to have a functional relationship since then. And people are like, oh, boo hoo to you. You gotta like, yes, boo hoo to him. Boo hoo, because somebody ruined his life and ruined his chance at having normal relationships. And it takes a lot of time and effort to get past something like that. And so, there's a lot of, like, when we talk about morality and stuff like that, people are just thinking of the instant morality and they're not thinking of the bigger picture. And that's like, when it comes to morality, God always sees the big picture, right? Like Satan shows you the snippet, right? The thing you want to see. And God shows you, like when God talks about morality, he sees it all. So when he tells you not to do something, it's because he knows it's bad. Not because he's being mean, not because he doesn't like you, but because he knows that down the road it will cause you more harm than not doing the thing would.
And that comes out in parenting. Like when you start telling your children, like, all right, well, don't do this because if you keep doing this, like when you're like 30, like you will be insufferable to other people. And to yourself, yeah. And you're gonna feel bad about it, or you're gonna be the weird kid, or you're gonna there's a whole bunch of this stuff like that's on that line where it's like, as a parent growing up, you know how kids are, you know how teenagers are, and you know what entering adult is. Now it doesn't matter what technology exists, because some people will try to play that game. Well, it's like, well, you didn't have instant messenger. Well, actually I did growing up. I had instant messenger. Like or like this idea of like, well, you didn't have a tablet growing up. And you're like, you're right. Like I didn't have a tablet growing up, but I know what it's like to have an interaction similar to that, and I don't need to know exactly like what this specific thing does in exactly the same way. And because kids still treat each other, like crap.
Oh yeah.
And teenagers still treat each other like crap because it's all a competition. And then
adults do too.
Yeah, adults do. It's just we're more subtle about it.
No.
Unless we start insulting each other,